make sure he gets a nice, pat on the back and stuff like that. So anyway, why open source is vital inside of IT, inside of really a whole bunch of different areas. First of all, a little bit about me. I've worn over my many, many years, every gray beard, every gray hair was well earned. I've worn many, many hats over the years. But really, I consider myself more than anything else a developer at heart. So a lot of what I'll be talking about is really from a developer point of view, with a developer mindset, and really how it's affected me as a developer. I'm going to be talking about open source. Some people may prefer to call it free software. You hear this acronym a lot, FOSS, free and open source software. They're pretty much almost the exact same things with some minor cultural differences inside of there. But one of the things that really, really bind things together is a license. Something is not open source unless it has a license, an open source or a free software license associated with it. That's very, very important. You can't call something open source unless it has this license. But for me, open source is something even more intangible, much more important than the license. It's the actual culture that's involved in these projects. Okay? It's about this idea, this sense, this inclusion in a community. Basically, it's about the people. It's about the people who are working involved in all these projects, in these communities, in these ecosystems. And you can't have really, really good community involvement without this idea of collaboration. People forget, people have this idea, people have this misconception that open source developers and other contributors are these, sole human beings, down in radon-filled basements, plugging away with green screens and stuff like that. It's certainly not the case. We want to be involved with each other. We want to learn from each other. We enjoy showing our skills and our crafts to other people. And open source has provided this ability for us. Open source is also really about the concept of transparency, that we're comfortable with the idea of what we're doing being hung out for people to look at. We want people to appreciate what we do. We also want people to comment on what we do. We want people to improve on what we do. And that can only be done with full and open transparency. Now, I'd love to take credit for this analogy, but this is actually Mark Hinkle gave me this idea. But I think the analogy is very, very apt. As you may guess, I enjoy beer. In fact, I'm a home brewer, okay? Beer is in many ways the common currency of open source development. You always see inside of source code comments, somebody owes me a beer or something like that. But what are we seeing nowadays? What's the biggest change that's going on inside of the beer community? It's this concept of microbrews, okay? Look at music, okay? Look at how the music has changed over the last several years. Music genres such as hip-hop and jazz and punk and grunge, they really are at their heart a revolt against the commercial, mass-produced, bloodless, passionless medium that was produced for us. We know what you want. Here, take it. Instead of an art form that was crafted by us. So open source really is this return to that hacker culture, is this awareness that really at the end of the day, we are artists. Back in the old days, when the large computers were the software dongles associated with everything, people shared software all over the place. That was what you did. Okay? It wasn't until you could make money selling software because computers were so ubiquitous that the idea of sharing software, of working collaboratively on software, that went away. Open source has now provided us that return to that idea. It's also enabled us to have that return of the concept of the developer sysadmin. That's what DevOps is, at least in my opinion, is this recognition that people who are really, really good contributors and people inside of open source also know the guts of what they're talking about. It's not an abstract tool for them. It's actually part and parcel of what they do. I also want to make sure that people are really, really well aware of the fact that I'm talking about all contributions are incredibly important inside of open source. Code contributions, documentation, evangelism, logos, white papers, sponsorships. All these things are incredibly important to help foster this idea, this sense of community, which I think is so important inside of open source. And the reason why open source has really become the de facto way of doing development. Okay, open source has become the core of what IT is all about. But because what we're sharing, what we're contributing is so important and so special, why do people do it? Why do people who could really earn quite a pretty penny selling their expertise in developing code or whatever, why are they doing it for free? Why are they doing it as volunteers? Well, first of all, it's because there's that idea that you have impact and influence. That you're able to join this community where you're actually really able to change the world. You get this real deep sense of personal satisfaction out of it. The other thing is this, you become part of a community. As I mentioned before, that is very, very important. I think that really at the end of the day, more than anything else, developers, contributors are artists. Code just happens to be our art form. It happens to be our craft. And like all artists, we want to share our skills. We want to hone our skills. We want to work with like-minded people. We want our art form to grow and thrive. And again, open source has provided now this opportunity for that to happen. It makes us marketable at the end. Your GitHub repository can, in a lot of ways, be your CV for a lot of people out there. And certainly when you're going for a job interview, most companies will ask to look at that for you. Why are companies so involved to it? Why have companies latched on the idea that open source is not just this thing that happens to exist out there, but is a vital aspect of how they do business. It's a vital aspect of how they do development. It's a vital aspect of what their business model is. Well, first of all, it's because open source is much more secure. Because it's much more transparent. The many eyes make all bugs shallow meme means that in general, because so many people use it and many people look at it, open source is much more secure by default. Also, it's much more performant in a lot of ways, but mostly it provides the ability for companies to be very, very agile. And I don't mean this in the agile manifesto development model, but being able to pivot very, very quickly. The ability for them to fail fast. We're all going to have business ideas and designs and architectures that are not going to be working out, that will fail. We need to be able to make sure that we can do that quickly. Open source provides the ability for companies, large and small, to find out what avenues work and what avenues will not work. It also provides this incredibly great feedback loop between the user community, the people that are selling their wares to, as well as the people who are doing the development. Most companies, in fact, I would say all companies that know how to handle and work with and collaborate with open source communities, those are the ones that are successful. It's the ones that keep the open source communities at a arm's width away, who don't enjoy that feedback loop. Those are the ones that have the most problems in figuring out how to use and leverage open source. But really, open source right now provides the ability for companies and people to innovate. It's really where the passion comes from. Any innovation comes from, at the end of the day, people who want to figure out cool and neat ways on how to do things. And open source has provided that capability. And so companies large and small are able to leverage that. It allows them to get the best talent and focus on the secret sauce, the stuff that differentiates them from other companies out there. But finally, as with all revolutions, there's a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt out there. You'd have to be living in a cave if you haven't seen the various reports and articles about companies wanting to redefine what open source is, or redefine licensings or things of that nature. I think we need to take that seriously and look at that. But the biggest thing, the biggest call to action is that we need to foster this new generation. I'm most probably not the oldest one here in the audience, When I started off, I was definitely one of the oldest people in there. But everybody was a lot younger. When we co-founded the ASF, I was most probably the only one married, the only one with kids. Everyone else was, in their early 20s, okay? Not seeing that a lot nowadays. And I think that comes on us, this generation, to help foster the new generation, to make them realize why it is important, to make them understand that open source is vital, and if we don't cherish it, we will lose it, to the detriment of ourselves and to the detriment of all the companies, large and small, who are basically using open source. So I would encourage everyone out there to please be a mentor. If there are people who are curious about it, reach out, be helpful to them, guide them. You were most probably mentored, return the favor. And if you are someone who's just getting started in open source, find someone who you look up to or whose opinions you respect. But I'm more than seriously willing to bet that they will be more than happy to help you out. Really, at the end of the day, join in and have fun, because that is really what this is all about. Open source is vital because it is personal. And by being personal, you're able to drive innovation in IT in a way that we're just starting now to appreciate. Thank you.
As we get started for the day, there are two rooms. This is room A, and the other one is room B. Thank you. The only copy of the schedule is online, but I want to try and see if I can't get you the schedule here, but it is not working for me, so I'm going to have to boot up my laptop. But I think Jim will be starting off here in a few minutes. Mike Rizzo will be starting off in the other room. So please select a room. I'll put up the schedule here on the screen here for a few minutes. There's still breakfast out there. Please grab some and go ahead and get settled so we can get started for the day. All right. Hi, we're on. You gonna be good to get Jim his things?
Yeah, so this went a little bit over time.
Yeah. We'll get it better. We'll get it. Just play it loose.
Yeah, AV guy, because I'm trying to get the projector working over there.
I don't know. I'm sorry. Is that him over there in the corner? All right, Jim, can we get you back up here?
So A and B, B is the career track.
tracks are a little off and on, but yeah, it'd be an A room. This is the A room, that's the B room. And because there's technically 4 tracks. So, yeah, so it's roughly half a day each track. So, but of course then speakers call and go, I can't do the afternoon, can I do the morning? It's like yeah. It's like, yeah, if you want to ruin my whole schedule. Yeah, exactly. Jim, sir? All right, if you guys would like to switch rooms, please do it now. We're going to go ahead and get started up here. Sorry, I don't want to break your laptop figuring out where it plugs in.
Oh, okay, thank you.
And you'll have a person here somewhere to tell you when you're running low on time.
Yes, I saw.
All right.
Perfect.
Good luck. Thank you.
Thank you. Should we get started? Or yes? Okay, great. Let me move that out of the way. I know we only have like, 20, 25 minutes or so. Blow through it kind of quickly. I'm not going to save time at the end for Q&A. If you have questions during the talk, just raise your hand real quick. The slides are going to be available online. I prefer this to be a conversation. It's a lot easier too with the number of people that we have. So anything at all, just pop your hand up real quick. As Kevin said earlier, I am one of the co-founders of the ASF after being one of the original Apache group people. So I've been doing Apache stuff for a long period of time. As I said before, I really consider myself a developer at heart. To pay the bills, I'm lucky enough to be the open source chef or chief at Consensus, a blockchain company actually based in Brooklyn. The talk today is going to be about the Apache Way, the heart and soul of Apache and the ASF. Basically, the idea of the Apache Way is a set of ideas or concepts that define how the ASF, the Apache Software Foundation itself, is run, but mostly how we think open source project governance should be run. You know, basically how you grow the community, how you develop software. Think of it as sort of like our take on the Agile Manifesto, for example. In fact, if you are familiar with the concept of inner source, which is, actually starting to ramp up a little bit. The idea of inner source is basically taking the lessons learned of successful open source projects and bringing those into enterprise IT, basically running your internal IT development as if it was an external open source project. And a lot of those basic tenets are based on the open source Apache Way model. Just for a little bit of a quick setup, the ASF is a 501c3 nonprofit. 501c3 means that we are a public charity, which is relatively unique in the open source foundation world. A lot of them are actually trade groups and things like that. What's important is that because, as I mentioned before in the keynote, that open source is very, very personal. We really have a focus on individuals. It is membership based. One of the reasons why we want to focus on the ASF for now is that we've had a lot of successes, we've had a number of failures as well. And there's learning points and different things to take away from both of those cases. And we do have a pretty good reputation, I think, in the space out there with both reporters as well as companies. Because we are a formal public charity, we do have this administrative sort of like org chart, which is basically this is how the foundation is is run, the nuts and bolts of the foundation. What I'm going to be talking about here are how the development is run, how the open source projects themselves are run. What I want everyone to take away from this is that the ASF, the administrative part, does not direct the development. You know, the board can't say we need a project to do this, or we need to add a feature to this. That's not the function of the board. That's the function of the community out there. That's the function of the projects. So we have this wall, this very, very clear, well-defined wall between the foundational aspects and the community aspects of it. A little bit of history, I think, will make things a little bit easier for people to understand where we are and why we are the way we are. Back in the 1990s or so, the web was just taking off. Probably the most used web server in the planet at that period of time was the NCSA web server. People know the NCSA Mosaic web browser. Well, on the server side was something, you know, also by the same people. When everyone left to join Netscape, the single person who was maintaining the NCSA web server joined Netscape as well. So here was a web server platform that a number of people were very dependent upon. I mean, we needed it. We relied on it. And now it was just lying there in the dust, nobody taking up for it. Okay. We were lucky enough, you know, in lightning in a bottle, that we were able to get enough people together to like boot up an email list and work and add some patches and things of that nature. So it was really, really important for us to come away with the mindset that this is how it affected us. We were left in a lurch because a software project, an open source project, didn't have enough community contributions associated with it. There was a big user community. There wasn't that much interaction between the user community and the developer community, so we wanted to avoid that. So not only did we have the absolute need for it, we had businesses that were relying upon it, but we also wanted to do it because it was fun. It was something that was fun to work on. It was something that was fun to add patches and features for. It was a nice sideline business for us as us. So the three basic tenets or legs of the Apache Way is the concept of meritocracy, focus on community, and finally the concept of collaborative development. And I'll go into detail on all of these on the next couple slides. First of all is the concept of meritocracy. I realize that in some avenues the term meritocracy is verboten. Because, you know, people abuse the concept of meritocracy to exclude diversity. You know, if your concept of meritocracy is dependent upon one's gender or genitalia or sexual orientation, that's an effed up version of merit, not a bad thing of meritocracy. So I really think meritocracy has a lot of value in there. It's really based on what you do, okay? It is based on your contributions. The idea is that just because I've been inside of Apache for a long period of time, and if I join another project, I have to gain merit at the same exact way as everybody else has to. Why did we do this at the very beginning? Because we realized that to have people contribute to open source, most probably they would be doing it on the side as a volunteer. Not as part of their job, even though eventually that may happen, but because they were interested in it. If you're constantly contributing to an open source project, but you get nothing out of it, you're never able to go up that ladder, you're never getting appreciated for it, then you're going to find another project to go away. You're going to find another project to make your contributions towards. So the idea that you gain merit, that you gain recognition in a very clearly defined path was very, very important to us. If you want to think of it as a duocracy, you can, but it really is a way of you know, acknowledging and rewarding people for the effort they put on towards it. Now, why is community better than code? Okay, we have an idea, a phrase inside the ASF, that community over code, or community before code. And the idea is that if you create a healthy, viable, diverse community, then the resulting code that comes out of that community is going to be kick-ass. It's going to be really, really good. It's going to be stable. It's going to be robust. Think of the analog inside of biological ecosystems. The more biologically diverse that area is, the healthier it's going to be, the more it's able to accommodate changes that may go on inside of the environment. The exact same thing is inside of open source project itself. So fostering and paying attention to the community aspects of a code base and the ecosystem is very, very important. Collaboration is also something that we think is of vital importance inside of the ASF. And collaboration in a way which maybe and I'm showing my age right now, the GitHub generation doesn't understand, where you fork off a project and you work on it yourself and every once in a while throw a push request over the wall. We're talking about real collaboration, about people having a shared vision, a shared goal, working together on a code base in a common venue rather than everybody, playing on their own little areas of the sandbox and every once in a while throwing something inside of there. One way of doing that is the concept of voting on code or voting on issues. This is really just to gauge consensus. It really isn't like a democratic process where the most votes win. It really is, as a community, do we agree with this? If there are a bunch of minus zeros, which means, I don't think so, but I'm not going to, push back against it, then in a healthy community, we'll step back and say, maybe we haven't thought this out through. Okay, it's really about making sure that everyone feels empowered and entitled to an opinion that makes sense inside of all those areas inside there. Another reason why we enjoy collaborative development is because it enables people to, because life gets in the way, to come back after long periods of time. If you've been away for vacation or, family business or something like that for a couple months, and you come back to work and your only communication mechanism has been like Slack, for example, it's going to be very, very tough to figure out what the hell happened in the last couple months, because Slack just isn't made for that. It's made mostly for like real-time development. The ASF is kind of unique in that we really focus on mailing lists because they're easily archivable, they're easily threadable, they're very, very low common denominator, so everybody has access to it. It doesn't take much to have an email client. It really makes things easier for anyone who has a passing interest in an open source project to figure out what's going on. You can get an archive of the mailing list and figure out what the ways and means of the project and how communication goes on. That's something that's really, really ideated for mailing lists. So even though it is kind of old school, you'll see inside the ASF that we have this baseless fondness for mailing lists inside there. Collaboration also implies the idea of transparency, that all of our development is done on public, openly available, archived mailing lists as well. Even our dirty laundry. All this stuff is done inside there. So all the development decisions that are being done aren't being done behind closed doors and then added onto after the fact. They're all done in not only the developer community, but also the user community as well. I talked a little bit in the keynote about this feedback loop. Well, when you enable that, when the user community is actually part of the developer community, you get this great feedback loop, because that's really where your contributors are coming from. That's where your developers are coming from, or from the user standpoint. That's how we got started in the Apache group. We were users of the NCSA web server. Now we started becoming developers. We wanted to make sure that we maintain that idea, that encouragement. We want to make things as easy as possible for somebody who uses it to also contribute later on downstream. We also have a couple other things inside here. One is this rule of 3, which basically says we need to make sure that there are always, at all times, 3 active developers inside of a project. Again, to avoid the situation where should someone get a new job or life gets in the way and they need to step away for a while, you don't have a project which is then dead and then, people are dependent upon. So we always make sure that there's enough people inside there and encourage fresh blood to come in to maintain this healthy long-term environment. And the other thing that I think is very, very important as well, it kind of goes back a little bit to the idea of meritocracy, is that we are all here as individuals, okay? What hat I wear at work doesn't matter. What hat I wear on the administrative side of the ASF doesn't matter. What matters is the way that I contribute to the project. There is this term, this deep recognition of respect for the actual individuals themselves. It really is a peer-based concept. Part of it is just to maintain the idea of Q&A, not Q&A, of QA. You know, we want to make sure that people are making the right changes, the right modifications, not adding regressions in the code and things like that. Yes?
What is PDL?
Okay, yeah. Right here is the concept of BDFL. There are a couple governance models inside of open source. First of all, there's the concept of what I call the walled garden, where it's an open source project, but they don't accept outside contributions. So it's really, really company controlled. So you can see it, you can use it, you can't contribute to it, or they keep the reins down very, very tightly. The second is kind of like the ASF, which is pure meritocracy. The third is an idea called the benevolent dictator for life, where someone has the ultimate authority, the ultimate recognition of being able to make decisions on behalf of the project. The Linux, kernel is a great indication of that, great example of that. Linux has final authority on what does and does not go into the kernel. We don't have that inside of the ASF. Again, we want to have a very, very flat level playing field because, again, if there's an idea of benevolent dictator for life or someone who has the ultimate say, then again, what is your encouragement as an outside contributor to contribute to that project if there is always going to be someone to overrule you? No matter how pervasive or persuasive your arguments are, if you can't get the community behind you to do that, then why bother? Now, certainly they've had great success, in doing that, but it's really not for the ASF. We avoid that kind of concept inside there. So no one's vote, no one's say is more important than anyone else's. And I think the other very, very important thing inside of the ASF is this idea of vendor neutrality. One of the reasons I think that the ASF is used, the software inside the ASF is used as much as it is, that has as many external contributors by companies, and that's how they contribute to the ASF, is by sponsorship dollars, but also by hiring people to work on their projects, with the understanding that if someone is an Amazon employee and they're working on Hadoop, or a Yahoo employee and they're working on Spark, they're still doing what's beneficial for the project itself, not necessarily who pays their salary. Companies understand that. Companies grok that. They understand that when you're an ASF contributor, you're operating on what's on behalf of the entire project itself, even if at times it may conflict with the short-term goals of a company. The reason why we can get away with that, the reason why companies understand that and appreciate that, is because we're not a pay-to-play kind of environment. We really are a very flat, neutral environment where all companies and corporations and entities are encouraged to contribute. So again, it's not like those companies with the bigger pockets are able to have more say in how an open source project is run. That never happens within the ASF, or at least we try to avoid that from happening. And if a project, for example, starts appearing, or actually in reality becoming sort of like not a shield for a company, but has undue influence by a company, the board takes that very, very seriously and squashes that down. It's very important for us to encourage all companies to be able to donate their software to the ASF, knowing that everyone gets a fair shake. That's a really, really nice, easy way for all entities to collaborate inside of there. And after all, we are a 501c3, a public charity. We can't, by legal definition, prefer one vendor or one company over another. So finally, really at the end of the day, what I'm talking about as far as the Apache Way is sort of like this concept of altruistic selfishness. Okay, we're doing it because it feels good, because we want to give back, but we're also doing it because we need it and it's important for us. And it's that fine balance between those two pinpoints, or those two balance points, which I think really, really defines us. We're pragmatic. At the end of the day, we understand that, yeah, we want to be volunteers and we want to be able to do all this stuff because it's fun and it's enjoyable, but we also have bills to pay. And that pragmatism, I think, is again part of the core of what the ASF talks about. I love this quote because it, again, makes what I'm talking about more personal. And again, it's an awareness and acknowledgement of that. This is a quote from the Little Prince. And it basically says, if you want to build a ship, don't drum up the men to gather wood, divide the work and give orders, the normal everyday way you would expect to be able to do, you know, community building or IT development or things of that nature. Instead, teach them to yearn for the vast and endless sea. And that'll just naturally happen. They will naturally self-organize. Open source and the Apache Way have definitely shown that. Given to our own devices, all open source contributors will self-organize in a really, really cool, healthy way, as long as you provide to them the mechanisms, the freedom, the small little binding forces, but also the flexibility to do what they need to do. And that's it. Thank you.
You still have 5 minutes.
I have 5 minutes, so yes.
Is there some necessary conditions for some projects to be successful under the Apache Way? Like, is there a critical mass you need to have, a certain competition?
Yeah, the question is there sort of like a criteria for success for an Apache project? What we have inside the ASF is this project called the Incubator, because we realize that awareness of this may not be obvious. You may need to have some training, some mentorship, some ideas on how to grow your community. And that's what the Incubator is all about. It's about instilling inside of these open source projects which come into the ASF, the tenets of the Apache Way, but also how to build a community. How diverse is that community? Part of the graduation criteria for the Apache Incubator is that in general, we like to have a very diverse contributor list. Yes, Kevin. Okay, well, we're wrapping it up. So yes, there is a criteria. I would encourage you to look at incubator.apache.org on graduation criteria. In fact, the incubation page is a great place for other ideas about this. I think we're done. Thank you very much. Have a great day. Enjoy yourselves, and thank you.